The night was alive with the sound of celebration. Fireworks lit up the sky, and the streets were filled with laughter and music as the world prepared to welcome a new year. For four friends, Jake, Laura, Nick, and Emily, this was the perfect time for an adventure. They had decided to spend New Year's Eve on the midnight train, a historic locomotive that promised a scenic journey through snow-covered landscapes, complete with champagne and live music. The train station was a blend of nostalgia and modern charm. Strings of golden fairy lights decorated the platforms, and a large Christmas tree stood at the center, adorned with glittering ornaments. Jake, always the planner, had booked their tickets months in advance. "This will be a night to remember," he said, holding up the tickets with a grin. As the train approached, its whistle echoed through the crisp night air. The locomotive was an imposing sight, its steel body gleaming under the station lights. But as it drew closer, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. There was something off about it. The windows were dark, and the air around it seemed heavier, colder. "Do you feel that?" she whispered to Laura. "Feel what?" Laura replied, adjusting her scarf. Emily shook her head. "Never mind." The group boarded the train, stepping into a lavishly decorated car. Red velvet seats, golden chandeliers, and garlands of pine created an atmosphere of vintage luxury. A cheerful conductor in a festive uniform greeted them, handing out flutes of champagne. "Happy New Year's Eve, folks! Sit back and enjoy the ride." As the train pulled away from the station, the friends toasted to the night. The sound of a jazz band played softly from the dining car, and the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks added to the cozy ambiance. They were ready to celebrate. But as the train sped into the night, the festive mood began to shift. The windows, which had offered a view of snowy fields and distant lights, now revealed only darkness. The jazz music grew faint, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Is it just me, or does it feel colder in here?" Nick asked, rubbing his hands together. Jake frowned. "Maybe the heating's acting up." Laura glanced at her phone. "No service," she muttered. She looked out the window, but the landscape was gone. It was as if the train was moving through a void. Emily's unease grew. "Something's wrong," she said. "We've been on this train for almost an hour. Shouldn't we have reached the first stop by now?" Jake waved her off. "Relax, Em. It's part of the experience. Maybe they're trying to build suspense." The train suddenly lurched, throwing them all forward. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment, Emily thought she saw a shadow move at the far end of the car. "What the hell was that?" Nick said, his voice tense. The conductor appeared again, but this time his cheerful demeanor was gone. His face was pale, his eyes distant. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a monotone voice, "please remain seated. Everything is under control." "Under control?" Laura said. "What's going on?" The conductor didn't answer. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the next car. Emily stood up. "I don't like this. We should find out what's happening." Jake hesitated. "Maybe we should just wait." "No," Emily said firmly. "Something's wrong, and I'm not sitting here waiting to find out what." The group reluctantly followed her, moving toward the dining car. The air grew colder with each step, and the low hum grew louder, almost like whispers. When they entered the dining car, it was empty. The tables were set for dinner, but the food was untouched, and the jazz band was nowhere to be seen. "Hello?" Jake called out. His voice echoed in the silence. Suddenly, the train's whistle blew, long and mournful. The lights dimmed, and a shadow fell over the car. Outside the windows, the darkness began to move, twisting and shifting like smoke. Emily felt a deep primal fear take hold of her. "We need to get off this train," she said. But as they turned to leave, the doors slammed shut, trapping them inside, and then the whispers became words. "Welcome aboard," a voice said, deep and resonant. "Your journey has just begun." The dining car was silent, save for the low hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Emily's breath was shallow, her eyes darting to every shadow that danced along the edges of the room. The others stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. "This isn't normal," Nick muttered, breaking the silence. "Where is everyone?" "Gone," Emily whispered. "Or worse." Jake rolled his eyes, though the tension in his voice betrayed his unease. "Come on, Em. You're being dramatic. Maybe this is all part of the experience. A themed train ride or something? Does this look like entertainment to you?" Emily shot back, pointing to the empty, eerily pristine tables and the unnatural darkness outside. Before Jake could respond, the train jolted violently, throwing them off balance. The chandelier overhead swayed, casting long, distorted shadows across the car. The whispers returned, louder this time, forming incomprehensible words that made Emily's skin crawl. Laura clung to a nearby table, her face pale. "We need to get out of here. I don't care where this train is going, I just want off." Emily nodded. "Agreed. But the doors are locked. We need to find another way." The group moved cautiously through the car, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The door leading to the next compartment loomed ahead, its frosted glass vibrating faintly with the motion of the train. Nick hesitated before opening it. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at the others. "No," Laura replied flatly, but she stepped closer anyway. Nick slid the door open. The next car was unlike anything they had seen. The luxurious decor was gone, replaced by cold steel walls and flickering dim lights. The temperature dropped noticeably, their breaths visible in the air. "What happened to the train?" Jake muttered, running his hand along the icy metal wall. Emily didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on something ahead, a figure standing at the far end of the car. It was tall and unmoving, its silhouette blurred as though it didn't quite belong. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The figure didn't move. Instead, the whispers grew louder, filling the air with an oppressive weight. Laura clutched Nick's arm. "Let's turn back," she pleaded. "We don't need to go this way." But as they turned, they found the door behind them had vanished. In its place was a blank steel wall, seamless and unyielding. "We're trapped," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure began to move, its steps slow and deliberate. As it approached, the lights flickered more violently, and the whispers shifted into an intelligible chant. "You cannot leave. You cannot escape." "Run!" Nick shouted, pulling Laura forward. The group sprinted through the car, dodging overturned chairs and broken railings that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The figure pursued them, its pace unhurried but relentless. Every door they passed opened to another identical car, each one colder and darker than the last. Finally, they burst into a car that looked different. The walls were lined with windows, and through them, they could see the landscape outside. But instead of snowy fields, there was only an endless expanse of twisted, gnarled trees bathed in an unnatural red light. The branches seemed to reach for the train as it passed, their movements disturbingly alive. "What is this place?" Laura gasped, collapsing onto a nearby bench. Emily approached one of the windows, her hand trembling as she touched the glass. It was freezing, almost burning her skin. "This isn't possible," she said. "We're not on the same track anymore." "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his voice rising in panic. "I mean," Emily said, turning to face him, "this train isn't taking us anywhere real. It's taking us somewhere else." Nick looked around, his jaw tight. "We need answers. That conductor, he knew something. We have to find him." As if on cue, the door at the far end of the car creaked open. The conductor stepped inside, his face shadowed but his eyes glowing faintly. He carried a lantern that flickered with an unnatural blue flame. "You should have stayed in your seats," he said, his voice hollow and cold. "What is happening?" Emily demanded. "Where are we?" The conductor tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "You boarded the midnight train. It's not a ride. It's a judgment." "Judgment for what?" Jake shouted. "For the past," the conductor replied. "For what you've done and what you've failed to do." Before anyone could respond, the lantern's light flared, and the car was bathed in blinding blue flames. The group shielded their eyes, but when they looked again, the conductor was gone. The car had changed once more, its windows now filled with swirling darkness. "What does he mean?" Laura whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What did we do?" "I don't know," Emily said, her voice shaky. "But I think this train is going to make us remember." The train surged forward into the void, the relentless clatter of its wheels echoing like a heartbeat. Emily, Jake, Laura, and Nick huddled together in the darkened car, their breaths fogging the icy air. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, alive with whispers and fleeting shapes that darted just out of sight. "We have to find a way off this train," Nick said, his voice trembling. "If we stay, we're not going to make it." Emily shook her head, her eyes fixed on the windows. The red-lit forest outside had vanished, replaced by an endless expanse of dark water. Waves lapped against the train, even though there were no tracks to hold it steady. The realization sent a chill through her. "There's no way off. The train isn't taking us somewhere. It's holding us." "Why?" Laura asked, her voice breaking. "Why us?" Emily turned to the others, her hands clenched into fists. I think it's about what the conductor said. Judgment. This train is forcing us to face something. Our pasts." "That's insane," Jake snapped, though his face was pale. "We didn't do anything. This is some sick prank or an experimental ride gone wrong." But even as he spoke, the truth settled over them like a heavy fog. Each of them felt it, a gnawing sense of guilt buried beneath years of denial. The train wasn't just a place, it was a mirror. The door at the far end of the car opened with a low creak. A blast of cold air rushed in, carrying with it the sound of faint cries. Emily's heart sank as she stepped forward. "We don't have a choice. We have to keep going." The others followed reluctantly, moving into the next car. It was different from the others. A long, narrow corridor lined with doors on either side. Each door was identical, made of dark wood with brass handles that gleamed faintly in the dim light. "What is this place?" Laura whispered, clutching Nick's arm. Emily reached for one of the handles, her hand shaking. The brass felt unnaturally warm under her touch. She opened the door slowly, revealing a room that seemed oddly familiar. It was a small bedroom, the walls covered in faded wallpaper. A child's bed sat in the corner, its blankets neatly folded. On the nightstand was a single photograph in a cracked frame. Emily stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat. It was her childhood room. She picked up the photograph, her hands trembling. It showed a younger version of herself standing with her parents, but the faces of her parents were blurred, their features erased. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The room dissolved around her, and she was back in the corridor. Jake, Laura, and Nick stood frozen, their faces pale. The doors around them were opening, each revealing a fragment of their past. Jake's door led to a darkened office, papers scattered across a desk. His failure to act in a moment of crisis loomed like a shadow over the room. Laura's door revealed a hospital room, empty but suffused with an overwhelming sense of loss. Nick's door opened to a rainy street, where headlights bore down on a figure he had left behind. "No," Nick said, shaking his head. "I can't do this. I won't." "You don't have a choice," Emily said, her voice trembling. "None of us do." The corridor began to twist, the walls bending and shifting as if the train itself were alive. The doors slammed shut, and the group was forced forward into a final car, It was cavernous and dark, the only light coming from a massive clock at the far end. Its hands ticked down to midnight, each second echoing like thunder. Standing beneath the clock was the conductor, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows. "You've reached the end of the line," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The choice is yours. Confront what you've done, or remain here forever." "What does that mean?" Jake demanded. The conductor stepped aside, revealing a set of double doors behind him. "Step through and face what awaits. If you are found worthy, you may leave. If not..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Emily stepped forward first, her heart pounding. She reached for the doors, their brass handles cold under her touch. As she pushed them open, blinding light engulfed her. She found herself standing in the middle of Times Square, the sound of cheers and fireworks filling the air. The others appeared beside her, each of them dazed but alive. "It's over," Laura whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We're back." But Emily wasn't so sure. She looked down at her hands, noticing a faint burn mark in the shape of the clock's hands. The others had the same mark, a reminder that the train had left its mark on them forever. Behind them, the sound of a train whistle echoed through the night, long and mournful. The midnight train was gone, but its shadow lingered, a promise that it would return for those who dared to forget its lesson.